a floating city of war just entered the Indian Ocean. An American carrier strike group is moving through the region with enough firepower to change the balance of the Middle East in days. The USS Abraham Lincoln alone deploys nearly 90 aircraft, is shielded by guided missile destroyers, and carries more than 7,500 sailors. Powered by nuclear reactors that can run for decades, and backed by a submerged submarine deadlier than most national arsenals, this is not a routine transit. And this is just the opening move. Let me take you back to December 28th. That's when everything changed. Iranian streets erupted, not the usual scattered protests. This was different. By January 8th and 9th alone, intelligence suggests up to 30,000 people may have been killed in just 2 days. The regime's security forces fired on their own citizens with such brutality that they ran out of body bags. The Iranian rial collapsed to essentially nothing. Drought devastated farmlands. Decades of mismanagement and corruption finally reached a breaking point. People weren't just angry anymore. They wanted blood. Supreme Leader Khamenei's 37-year grip on power faced its greatest threat since 1979. That was the moment President Trump delivered a promise that sent shockwaves through Tehran's war rooms, declaring that help was on its way. But what kind of help? Was it a military strike, covert operation, or a regime change? Washington kept its cards close. Iran's generals knew one thing for certain, though. Something massive was moving their direction. Before we reveal what the U.S. is really deploying, hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what's coming next. And if you're enjoying this, drop a comment below with your take on how this situation will unfold. But this is only the surface. What's being positioned right now goes far beyond a single carrier group, and most people have no idea how quickly this can escalate. On January 22nd, President Trump didn't just threaten Iran. He activated a military mobilization not seen since the lead-up to the Iraq War. Fighter jets began moving across the globe, not 1 or 2 squadrons, entire wings. F-15 E-Strike Eagles from RAF Lakenheath in England were deployed to Muwafaq Salti Air Base in Jordan. These aren't old fighter jets. Each Strike Eagle can carry 23,000 pounds of precision-guided munitions. They can strike targets over 790 miles away. But here's what makes them special. They're veterans. These same jets defended Israel against Iranian drone and cruise missile barrages. So they know Iran's playbook. But the Strike Eagles were just the beginning. Cargo jets and aerial refueling tankers flooded into the region. Satellite imagery picked up movements that defense analysts called unprecedented in peacetime. Patriot missile batteries materialized at bases across the Middle East. Terminal high-altitude area defense systems appeared seemingly overnight. These defensive systems aren't just about protecting American bases. They're preparing for something Iran has promised to deliver. Retaliation that would be more painful and more decisive than in the past? What exactly was Iran threatening? And more importantly, what target was so valuable that the U.S. needed this much firepower to hit it? Trump's promise wasn't about saving protesters. Intelligence sources told Reuters the real target: Iran's ballistic missile systems and nuclear enrichment facilities. The same underground bunkers that Israel's F-35s couldn't fully penetrate. The same facilities that inch Iran closer to nuclear weapons every single day. The U.S. was preparing for the most complex air campaign since Desert Storm. On Monday, January 27th, the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group crossed into U.S. Central Command's area of responsibility. For those who don't speak military, that means it entered Iran's backyard. Let me paint you a picture of what just arrived in the Indian Ocean. The Lincoln is a Nimitz-class supercarrier. It's essentially a floating city with 4.5 acres of sovereign American territory. But unlike a city, this one bristles with weapons. Carrier Air Wing 9 operates from its deck. 8 squadrons, F-35C Lightning IIs, the Navy's newest stealth fighters that Iran's radars can't reliably track. FA-18EF Super Hornets, the workhorse multi-role fighters that have proven themselves in combat from Afghanistan to Syria. EA-18G Growlers, electronic warfare jets that can blind enemy air defenses before they even know they're under attack. E-2D Hawkeyes providing 360-degree surveillance, and that's just the aircraft. 3 Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers escort the Lincoln. The USS Frank E. Peterson Jr., USS Michael Murphy, and USS Spruance. Together, they carry over 280 vertical launch cells. Each cell can fire Tomahawk cruise missiles with 1,000-pound warheads that can hit targets 1,000 miles away, or standard missiles to shoot down Iranian ballistic missiles and aircraft, or anti-submarine weapons. And nobody's saying it out loud, but everyone knows, somewhere beneath those waves, a fast-attack nuclear submarine prowls. But why mobilize this level of force if you're just hitting a few missile sites? The Pentagon's official line was clear. This is about Iran's nuclear program. But intelligence chatter suggested something different, something that would explain why every major power from Russia to the European Union was suddenly screaming for diplomatic solutions. Let's talk about Operation Midnight Hammer. Last June, B-2 Spirit stealth bombers launched from the continental United States and struck Iran's nuclear facilities. The mission was surgical, precise. It was meant to set Iran's nuclear program back years, but it didn't work. By January 2026, intelligence assessments showed Iran had rebuilt faster than anyone predicted. Worse, they'd learned from the attack. Facilities went deeper underground. Security got tighter. Enrichment accelerated. Iran was now estimated to be just weeks away from weapons-grade uranium. This is getting intense, right? If you want to understand military strategy and global power plays like this, you need to subscribe to this channel. We break down complex geopolitical situations in ways that actually make sense. Hit that like button too, it helps us bring you more content like this. President Trump faced a calculation. A limited strike might not be enough. Iran had dispersed its nuclear program across dozens of sites. Some were in urban areas. Some were protected by Russian-made S-300 air defense systems. Hitting them all would require the kind of air campaign that only the US military could execute. That's why the Lincoln was there. Not for one strike. For sustained operations, the carrier would provide continuous air cover, electronic warfare support, and defensive capabilities for a campaign that could last days or even weeks. The Strike Eagles in Jordan, the bombers that could fly from the US, the Tomahawks on the destroyers, they were all pieces of a much larger puzzle. This wasn't about sending a message. This was about eliminating Iran's nuclear capability permanently, or at least setting it back so far that the next administration would have to deal with it instead. But Iran wasn't going to just sit there and take it. Tehran's strategy has always been different from conventional military powers. They don't fight head-on. They use proxies, the so-called axis of resistance. Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, Kataib Hezbollah in Iraq, all pledged to strike American and Israeli targets if Iran came under attack. Hezbollah's leader Naim Qassem said any attack on Iran would be considered an attack on his organization. He warned it will ignite the region. The Houthis were already warming up. They released a propaganda video on Monday suggesting they'd target the USS Abraham Lincoln itself. It was bravado. Their anti-ship missiles had never successfully hit a US carrier, but the threat was real enough that the Navy took additional defensive measures. Israel had spent months decimating Hezbollah in Lebanon. The Israeli Air Force conducted systematic strikes that destroyed weapons depots, command centers, and leadership. Hezbollah was a shadow of its former self. But shadow doesn't mean harmless. Intelligence estimates suggested Hezbollah still had tens of thousands of rockets pointed at Israeli cities. The Houthis controlled key choke points in the Red Sea. Iraq's militias operated within miles of American bases. The question wasn't if these proxies would attack. It was how devastating their response would be, and whether the US had positioned enough defensive assets to stop them. While American carriers steamed toward Iran and fighter jets deployed across the Middle East, the rest of the world watched with growing alarm. Russia's Kremlin warned that any use of force would create chaos in the region. They weren't wrong. Russia has interests in Iran, economic, military, and strategic. An American attack would upend their calculations across the entire Middle East. Turkey offered to mediate. Turkey shares a 310-mile boundary with Iran. A regional conflict would send refugees flooding into Turkish territory. It would disrupt trade. It would force Turkey to choose between its NATO obligations and its regional relationships. Even the European Union spoke up. Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas stated the already volatile Middle East does not need a new war. European nations remembered what happened when the US toppled Saddam Hussein. They remembered the chaos in Libya. They were terrified of what Iran's collapse might unleash. But perhaps most telling was the United Arab Emirates' position. The UAE, a close American partner, announced it would not allow its airspace, territory, or waters to be used in any military operations against Iran. One of America's closest Gulf allies just said, "We're sitting this one out." Why? Because everyone in the region understands what Washington seems to forget. You can destroy a regime in days, but you can't control what comes after. Iran isn't Iraq or Afghanistan. It's a nation of 89 million people with ancient civilizations, complex tribal dynamics, and a revolutionary ideology that survived despite 4 decades of sanctions and isolation. A U.S. military strike wouldn't just topple the regime. It would create a power vacuum in the heart of the Middle East that every regional power would rush to fill. Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Russia, even China. The war might last weeks. The aftermath would last generations. This situation different from every other Iran crisis in modern history. Nobody knows what Trump will actually do. Not Iran's generals, not American allies. On January 13th, he told protesters help is on its way. On Thursday, he warned Iran that time is running out and demanded they negotiate no nuclear weapons. Just days later, reports emerged that he'd called off a planned strike after being told the killing of protesters would stop. Military analysts call this strategic ambiguity. Critics call it chaos. Either way, it keeps Tehran guessing. Every time American forces move, Iranian air defenses go on high alert. Every time Trump tweets, Iranian officials scramble to decode his intentions. It's exhausting, expensive, and possibly exactly what Trump wants. But this strategy has a dark side. Wars have started over misunderstandings. A jittery Iranian air defense commander might shoot first and ask questions later. A miscalculation by a proxy group could trigger the very war nobody wants. And with all these forces positioned, all these weapons armed, all these threats issued, the margin for error has shrunk to almost nothing. Intelligence assessments in Israel suggested the U.S. wants a clean, swift, and inexpensive operation. They want to hit those responsible for killing protesters and set back the nuclear program. Maybe even replace the regime. But military history teaches us that wars rarely go according to plan. Operations designed to be clean and swift have a habit of becoming messy and protracted. Just ask the Soviet Union about Afghanistan, or the United States about Iraq. The forces now positioned in the Middle East give Trump options. Lots of options. He can strike nuclear facilities, hit ballistic missile sites, target command and control centers, enforce a no-fly zone, conduct special operations to support regime change. But every option carries risks. Every strike invites retaliation. Every bomb dropped creates martyrs. The capability that's shaking Iran right now, America's overwhelming military superiority, comes with a burden. The burden of choosing wisely when to use it. As of now, no attack has begun. The USS Abraham Lincoln continues its patrol in the Indian Ocean. F-15E Strike Eagles sit on runways in Jordan, their pilots waiting for orders. THAAD batteries scan the skies for incoming missiles. Israeli airspace closure warnings suggest heightened alert periods at the end of January and beginning of February. IDF Major General Rafi Milo said Israeli forces are prepared and ready if a U.S. strike triggers Iranian retaliation against Israel. Inside Iran, the death toll from protests continues to climb. Human rights organizations estimate between 6,000 and potentially 25,000 people have died since late December. Internet blackouts and communications blockades make verification nearly impossible. But the videos that leak out tell a story of brutality that has shocked even hardened observers. Supreme Leader Khamenei blames the U.S. and Israel for the unrest. He's not entirely wrong. Both nations have supported Iranian opposition groups for years. But the rage in Iran's streets isn't manufactured in Washington or Tel Aviv. It's homegrown, decades in the making. The US didn't create Iran's economic collapse or its oppressive government. They just provided a scapegoat for it. So what's shaking Iran right now? It's not just the carrier strike group or the fighter jets or the missile batteries. It's the realization that the United States has positioned the capability to end the Islamic Republic if it chooses. In days, maybe hours, the regime that has ruled Iran since 1979 could cease to exist. Tehran's generals know this. They've war-gamed American strikes. They've built bunkers and dispersed forces and prepared retaliatory plans. But at the end of the day, they also know they cannot win a conventional war against the United States. Their strategy is to make victory so costly that America decides it's not worth it. Will it work? That depends on Trump, on his advisors, on whether he's willing to accept American casualties, on whether he believes he can topple the regime without getting bogged down in another Middle Eastern quagmire. The forces are in position, the plans are drawn, the world is watching, and somewhere in the Indian Ocean, the USS Abraham Lincoln waits for orders that may never come, or may come tomorrow. That's the situation as it stands right now. American military power concentrated in one region with a singular purpose. But do you think the US should strike Iran's nuclear facilities? Or is this a war America can't afford to start? Drop your answer in the comments. If this analysis helped you understand what's really happening in the Middle East, please subscribe to the channel. We're going to keep covering this story as it develops. Also, if you want to understand the military hardware that could be used in this potential conflict, check out our previous video on the top 5 fighter jets in 2026, who's number 1. You'll see exactly which aircraft dominate modern warfare and why some of them are positioned near Iran right now.